What is up, guys? There has been some insane stuff going on in Mexico with cartels and some dude named Mencho and all kinds of crazy stuff. So we're going to cover this. You know, we cover all big news regarding different conflicts and stuff. Even though I'm in Ukraine, this is still a big ass deal. So we're going to watch this. This is a Cappy Army video. He does arguably some of the best breakdowns in conflict in the conflict news sphere. So this is going to be exciting. Hey, do me obviously go follow Cappy Army. If you found my channel, you probably already follow him, but he's the OG of this shit. So go check him out. Also, do me a favor, please like, share, subscribe to this channel as well. Help us blow this up. Help us get more eyes on what's going on here in Ukraine. If you're on your way out to Ukraine, make sure you're in our Discord. We have tons of resources regarding different foreigner units, how to get to Ukraine, what to do, blah, blah, blah. Jump in the Discord. Merch, all of our different breed merch, hats, hoodies, t-shirts, link below. All right, let's go. Cappy Army, baby, let's get it.
Intelligence tracked the girlfriend of Mexico's top cartel boss, leading them. U.S. military intelligence tracked the girlfriend of Mexico's top cartel boss, leading them to his secret location. Was that baddie worth it? Then, Mexican and U.S. special forces descended on the small town of Tapalpa in a killer capture mission. Aerial surveillance spotted multiple men armed with rocket launchers and machine guns. To give you an idea of the kind of psychopath that they're going up against, El Mencho is the founder of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, one of the two top dogs in the country. He's responsible for killing hundreds of thousands with fentanyl and leaving behind a trail of mass graves in Mexico, where all that's left are a stack of shoes next to an oven. If there is anything that Mexico and the United States can agree on, it's this guy's gotta go. That's why they partnered on this mission in a new level of cooperation between the two nations. The US deployed their new Joint Interagency Task Force Counter Cartel, and their whole meaning in life is to map out networks of narco members on both sides of the US-Mexico border. The task force is a mix of intelligence personnel and law enforcement from within the US military that help provide targeting information for the on-the-ground Mexican army, a high-stakes version of a trust fall. But this actually sounds very familiar to how the two have partnered for years already, for decades really, including the capture of El Chapo in the past. So what's different about this? Well, it appears to be the level of on-the-ground involvement. Mexico's defense minister and the U.S. defense officials both confirmed the operation was part of bilateral coordination and cooperation with the United States, which is the best kind of coordination, and that they received supplementary information from U.S. authorities. Imagine how much of a problem you have to be in order to get the U.S. and Mexican government to put their differences aside and team up with each other. Attack helicopters armed with Gatling guns moved in over the objective as close air support. The way they captured him is insane, and that's only the beginning of the story because it sparks a full narco war. This video is sponsored by SDI. If you're interested in a career in drone related to weapons and even pump lathe, that they technology edited online
check out Cappy Army SDI. Sorry, I didn't mean to just jump past his little promotion here.
SDI
I did. So this is massive information. All I saw basically was that Mexico was on fire, specifically like Puerto Vallarta and that region, and different Americans who were there on vacation having to shelter in place and saying that they saw like people dead in the streets, cars on fire, all kinds of weird shit.
With hands-on teams and the joint team, clicking my link in the description down below or the pinned comment. Now back to the video. When the joint team reached their target on the ground to make the arrest, a firefight broke out, and the Mexican army, the team engaged El Mencho and his henchmen, trading automatic gunfire. Overhead, the attack helicopters opened up with Gatling gunfire, pouring it down on the objective. Troops pushed the narco fighters back into the surrounding hills and into the woods, where they chased them and blocked them off, giving them nowhere to run by surrounding them and boxing them in. When we look at the topography of where the battle took place, you could see how the gunmen were forced into the hills, and there isn't much cover for them in the wide open rural plains. When the dust had settled on the Mexican standoff, 8 cartel sicarios were killed on the scene, and their boss El Mencho was confirmed eliminated. He died from gunshot wounds on the way to the hospital. 3 Mexican security forces were injured in the initial assault. The bravery of the Mexican military was captured in this viral video of one of the Mexican troops who had legitimately caught a bullet with his teeth. I'd buy that man a cervezas any day. Then tactical site exploitation moved in and they confiscated multiple narco armored vehicles and freaking rocket launchers. The US and Mexican government high-fived and rejoiced, but it was a premature celebration because, as we'll see, killing El Mencho was only the beginning of the fight.
So correct me if I'm wrong here, but this did not seem like a snatch and grab operation. This seemed like a let's go fuck shit up and kill everybody mission on the side of Mexico. They didn't seem like they were wanted to. I'm sure there was some aspect or some contingency plan to where they would take El Mencho alive if he gave up, and it was easy enough, but it didn't seem like that was their main goal with the way that they initiated contact here.
Cartel gunmen took to the streets in retaliation for the death of their boss. The Mexican army engaged the cartel in gunfights throughout the state. All hell broke loose, basically. It was like the purge, but on the streets of Mexico. Armed CGNG cells stopped innocent people in the middle of the highway, pulled them out of their cars, poured gasoline all over it, and lit them on fire. Can you imagine that happening to you? They're burning down businesses left and right like it's GTA 6 out there, but they managed to set up over 250 roadblocks across 20 of the 31 Mexican states. They even broke out heavy excavators like an engineering brigade. This looks more like an insurgency than a criminal organization. The tactic...
And we got Maduro and El Mencho before GTA 6. That shit is wild.
That the cartel is using here with these blockades is to create choke points that prevent Mexican soldiers from getting reinforcements to the objective. It's to reduce their ability to have mobility in response and to make them less effective. They're also using the blockades to stop tourists from getting out, to create traps and to hold them as potential hostages. And I just realized that last bit of B-roll that we just used might have been AI generated, and I'm such an unk I can't even tell at this point anymore.
Same.
But it's a huge problem because when there's chaos like this, it's difficult for people to determine what's really going on the ground. Their ultimate goal, the cartel here, is to create fear in the population and the Mexican army. So Mexican officials were concerned about targeting El Mencho because of the chaos that it would cause. But the US government has been putting increasingly every single type of pressure. They're pulling all of the levers that they can on Mexico to get them to act quickly against cartel bosses. Because the relationship between these two governments has been super tense recently on both sides. The US government has threatened to tariff Mexico heavily and threatened to take unilateral military action as leverage for them to do more about the cartel violence. Through this pressure, Mexico has recently sent 90 high-profile narco terrorists that were extradited to the United States. But is it too little too late? Evidence that El Mencho's death and all of this has to do with US pressure is because Mexico's President Sheinbaum has always in the past avoided operations that targeted cartel leaders due to the risk of triggering this kind of retaliatory violence. The governor of Jalisco, Pablo Lemus, started live tweeting the chaotic aftermath of El Mencho's death. He stated that everyone needed to stay in their homes and that the government had activated a quote-unquote code red, rojo, which is about as bad as it sounds, essentially putting the entire state in Mexico into a lockdown after the cartel went nuts because their boss was killed. It's an urgent message to the public that means that public transportation is suspended, residents are told to shelter in place indoors and not go outside. It's clear why. Look at how this gunman was leisurely hanging in the middle of the road like it's a Tuesday, bragging about being in control of the highway here with impunity to avenge El Mencho. And so this is what we're looking at here. This is why people think that they're narco-terrorists, because they scare the entire state into forcing them to not go outside and to shutter their windows. Wild choice here, though, recording yourself doing a crime when there are an army of psychopaths at Palantir working to identify you based on your biometrics. In retaliation to the retaliation, though, the Mexican army surged combat patrols to fight the cartel back. But then things got worse. So there were rumors circulating at first that Cartel executed a coordinated attack on the Guadalajara airport, the second largest city in Mexico. I mean, it'd be almost like if The LAX Los Angeles airport went down. I can't imagine an airport being shut down by a criminal group. Terrified innocent civilians fled from the scene. It later turned out that it was a false alarm. There was no attack on the airport, but it shows the kind of hysteria that can spiral out of control with fear from the cartels, can shut down a whole airport without firing a shot. Then I see something interesting happen in the midst of all this chaos, because when there's a crisis, some organizations will never let it go to waste. The head of the private security company named Sabre Defense, he says that they've deployed aviation assets and security personnel to Mexico, and they currently have pilots and aircraft on standby for private security extractions of US citizens in Puerto Vallarta. Almost all of those private security guys are former special forces who would then be operating inside of Mexico without diplomatic cover. The type of international kerfuffle that might cause is very interesting to think about. We know that US private military contractors went to Colombia for many years under a $600 million contract where they fought against narco-terrorists there. So is that something that we're going to see here? An increase in private military organizations from the US kind of going to Mexico now? This violence should come as no surprise though, because over 23,000 homicides were reported in Mexico in 2025. That's 5 times the amount that were killed in the entire global war on terror in just 1 year. But what shocked me even...
Okay, hold on. Let's take a minute to absorb this field of gravity of this. 20, how many years is that? 25 years? Global war on terror was 1/4 of the amount of kills, or 1/3 the amount killed than 1 year. That is crazy, man. Holy shit. I'm trying to look at this and like absorb it.
Even more about those numbers is that that's actually low. They've dropped 30% since last year, but a lot of people believe that those numbers are being manipulated now, because while murders are down 30%, disappearances in Mexico are up 16%, which suggests to me that maybe the Mexican government might be trying to hide murder numbers by classifying them as disappearances instead. We see this done in the United States as well. What we're seeing now, though, is why those murder numbers are so high. Narco violence in Mexico threatens U.S. interests far beyond drugs or crime, though. The United States wants to invest heavily in Mexico as an alternative to their greatest rival, China. But doing this is difficult with the security threat and instability of narco organizations. It may have been true at one time that if American demand for drugs stopped, then the supply would stop and the cartels would have no money. But the problem has become far more complicated. And it explains how El Mencho's cartel has been able to fund this massive countrywide retaliation. Beginning in 2018, they started hijacking tanker trucks at gunpoint, and then they directly bribed refinery owners and extorted rig workers. This practice became so profitable and widespread that cartel fuel thieves have their own nickname. The huge problem here is that this money is now rivaling the amount that they make through the drug trade, and that kind of funds makes them powerful enough to stand up to the state. But there is a rule that they forgot. You don't touch America's boats, and you don't touch America's oil. That's why the cartel is getting the heat right now, I think. Take a look at how Mexico is crisscrossed by pipelines. These run from oil fields to refineries and then to ports. That's millions of gallons of oil just flowing through that the cartel wants to target. The way the operation works from the inside is cartel fighters recruit former oil workers to join them. These subject matter experts know enough about the system to pioneer ways to tap into those oil pipelines. It's impossible to secure all of them throughout the country, right? Wow. The cartel is now working hand in hand with corrupt Americans to steal $20 billion of fuel from the Mexican government a year. They use hidden hoses that are dangerously connected to pipes that sometimes explode, but usually they just continuously siphon fuel to secret pickup spots. American export companies buy diesel legally, then they fake their export documents pretending they aren't shipping fuel to Mexico, but they are. They send the fuel to cartel-owned companies in Mexico, sometimes knowingly, sometimes unwittingly. This is huge for the cartel because...
Okay, if there's American companies knowingly selling fuel to cartels, whoever's facilitating that needs to go to prison for a long time. Because I agree, especially coming from Mexico, fentanyl is a major issue. It is the number, or at least it was the number one cause of death for people between the ages of like 16 to like 45 or something. Number one cause of death over anything else in the United States, over car accidents, heart attacks, anything that you think like, oh, well, this kills a lot of people. Nothing compared to the amount of fentanyl deaths, not just drug deaths. This was overall deaths. The most is fentanyl.
Because right now, fentanyl prices have fallen 80% within the last 2 years. Here's the thing that I think people aren't getting is that when you have an extra $20 billion in funds, you can do just about anything with it. And even famous units like the Mexican Navy, the Mexican Marines that are so well known for being untouchable. Last September, high-ranking officers in the Mexican Navy were among 14 arrested in northern Mexico as part of a fuel smuggling ring. The incident has been called Mexican Navy's Black Week. It created a huge internal problem of not knowing who to trust anymore. And if you look too deep into what they're doing over there, you get got. Because one of the top investigators at the Tamaulipas Attorney General's office was assassinated by the Gulf Cartel for digging too deep into their fuel smuggling network. Just look at how they're using this extra illicit fuel revenue. The raid on El Mencho is just the most recent example of rumors of US forces and FBI agents on the ground inside Mexico. Take the capture of one of the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives, for example, a cartel-linked narco boss named Ryan Wedding. Yes, that same Ryan Wedding, the former Canadian Olympic snowboarder from the 2002 games, who somehow went from carving up the powder on the snowboard to allegedly running a $1 billion cocaine empire under Sinaloa cartel protection.
That a movie needs to be made about this. I don't want to like idolize somehow this guy who had a hand in most likely millions, at least, okay, maybe not millions, but at least thousands and thousands and thousands of Americans' deaths by being top brass in the Sinaloa cartel. I don't want to idolize that, but this is an insane switch up. You go from the Olympics to some gringo running the fucking Sinaloa, high up in the Sinaloa cartel. What?
Like one casually does, right? For more than a decade, U.S. authorities say Wedding hid inside of Mexico, protected by cartel networks. He was moving massive quantities of cocaine across all of the Americas, and he was allegedly...
Cocaine. I said fentanyl.
Ordering multiple murders tied to his trafficking operation. Then suddenly he's captured in Mexico and flown straight to California in U.S. custody. And that's where the story gets really murky, I think, because U.S. officials framed it as a major joint law enforcement success. But Mexico's President Sheinbaum immediately downplayed any foreign role, saying that Wedding voluntarily surrendered at the United States Embassy in Mexico and said that Wedding turned himself in and showed what may have been an AI-generated Instagram post as proof. It's okay, I get fooled by AI all the time. I'm an unk and I admit it. But to make things even more confusing, Ryan Wedding's own attorney said that he didn't turn himself in willingly and that he was arrested by officials. Meanwhile, reporting from Mexico and US outlets suggest different things, that the FBI personnel were actually involved on the ground in Mexico during the arrest, something that's extremely sensitive because US agents are generally barred from those type of unilateral or even joint operations over there. But whatever the truth is, one thing is clear. A cartel-protected narco boss who lived safely in Mexico for over decades is now suddenly in U.S. custody, and nobody can quite agree how it happened. Cartel bosses are getting...
That is crazy. I think about that, right? I bet somebody at this level, somebody at El Chapo or El Mencho or Wedding or somebody at such a high level, if they get put into a prison in Mexico, they either get treated like royalty there, it's basically like living in a penthouse, or the cartels just come and break them out and they're out. Like that happened to El Chapo like 3 times, right? So I bet you, and the US knows this, so the US is like, we need to get that guy and put him in here in the United States.
Yoinked and dropped all over the place in this last year. The situation on the US-Mexico border is just getting weirder and weirder, more dangerous, in a way that almost nobody fully comprehends at the moment. A few days ago, US military personnel operating along the border near El Paso detected an unidentified object crossing into US airspace. They tracked it, they classified it as a potential threat, and then they shot it down. Although it might have been a balloon that they shot down, or it could have been a cartel drone. At first, nobody could agree on what it was. Some reports said that it might have been a party balloon, Others suggested a small aircraft, but almost immediately a third possibility started circulating among border security circles, and it was a cartel drone. What we do know is that authorities temporarily shut down El Paso International Airport. That's 2 international airports shut down in like 2 weeks across different borders because of the cartel. That is extraordinarily rare, and it's something that we haven't seen since 9/11. Drones have become one of the most dangerous emerging tools in cartel operations, and it's not clear how US authorities or Mexican authorities are supposed to handle them. I remember over here by me in New Jersey, there was a whole kerfuffle about drones flying overhead, and it turned out to be from the US government, but it's unclear what the response to these are supposed to be. And it happens now many thousands of times per month. As many as 2,000 cartel incursion drones happen per month. Many are simple surveillance platforms, scouts in the sky, mapping border patrol movements. They're just identifying gaps in fences and tracking when these smuggling corridors are clear. So far, most of the drones haven't been weaponized, but the trajectory, I think, is obvious and really freaking concerning, because cartels are already escalating against US personnel on the ground. Intelligence shared among federal and local agencies have indicated that some criminal groups have begun circulating bounty structures targeting American law enforcement and border officials. The reported tiered payouts are pretty freaking chilling. A few $1,000s for collecting and doxing agents' information, roughly $10,000 for kidnapping, or up to $50,000 for killing senior official.
5 to 10,000 for kidnapping or non-lethal assaults on standard ICE CBP officers. I wonder why a kidnapping would be so much less than assassination. I would think a kidnapping would be more difficult, right? An assassination, you roll up on a fucking moped, pop him in the back of the head, and then dip, right? But kidnapping, you gotta like deal with this person. You gotta feed it and shit.
That kind of incentive normalizes violence against US agents. It's increasingly looking like an insurgency. The escalation this year has gotten worse as we've seen what they are smuggling in. It's more than drugs. Now these gunmen are increasingly overwhelming security forces with 50 caliber rounds that were originally produced at Lake City Munition Plant in Kansas City, Missouri. It's the small arms factory for US military production, just pumping out billions of rounds. But on the morning of November 30th, 2019, a convoy of pickup trucks carrying gunmen entered the town of Villa Union, and they started spraying 50 cal machine gun fire. Eventually, the Mexican army did what they do best. They drove in and they murked 19 of the cartel cold, but 4 police officers were killed and 2 civilians. An investigation, though, later found that those 50 cal rounds ended up being third-party purchases by private citizens in the retail market that was then sent to the cartels instead of military use. Because by allowing civilians to buy ammo, it makes it cheaper for the military. Then the Mexican government themselves also bought some 50 caliber rounds. So it somehow landed in the cartel's hands, and they've used these to shoot down helicopters and assassinate government officials. The Jalisco New Generation cartel uses tactics that are more like a military. They've shot down helicopters, they've assassinated politicians, and this is exactly the kind of retaliation that we expect during one of these events, because when El Chapo's son was captured in 2019, there was a massive 700 gunman battle that took place in broad daylight, and they only stopped once they got what they wanted, which was the return of El Chapo's son. But this violence today is a little bit less clear what they want in return. The CJNG is the same.
So they returned El Chapo's son, and is he just still at large doing cartel shit? Let me know in the comments. That's actually really interesting to me.
Cartel faction that carried out an assassination attempt against the now head of the federal security, Garcia Harfuch. A full platoon of 40 gunmen executed a carefully coordinated ambush plan against him. They intercepted his armored vehicle at dawn in 2020 using military tactics. They threw grenades, they pelted it with machine gun fire, and they shot at it with well-aimed 50 caliber sniper rifle shots right on Mexico capital city Grand Boulevard. Garcia survived but was shot 3 times, and 2 of his guards were killed. There's a parallel armed power growing in Mexico, you guys. The deeper the cartel embed into the energy and they take over these entire regions, the more inevitable direct confrontation from the United States becomes. Hopefully, the joint cooperation groups between the Mexican and US military are able to put a serious dent in their operations this year. Check out this video on how the United States is already conducting agents' information, roughly tied to his...
God, I love this his content, man. There's such good breakdowns, but cartels. If you've been following this channel for as long as I've had it up, the last couple of years now, you know that we don't like cartels, obviously, and I've expressed multiple times how much of a problem they are for the United States, especially when I started learning about the amount of deaths that are directly caused by cartels and their drug manufacturing and supply lines and kidnappings, assassinations, rapes, murders, their affiliation with helping with human trafficking, all kinds of stuff, just bad shit. Plus, all you have to do is one Google search of a cartel video and you'll see how ruthless these people are. They're absolute animals, man. So they're scary organizations for sure. There's a lot of money involved, and they become pretty much their own militaries. They have military grade equipment. They're pretty scary these days. So it's cool to see the U.S. and other South American states and countries coming together to get rid of this shit like Maduro and El Mencho, and hopefully they can squash it because it is scary to have that in the backyard of the United States, man. It's like it's like living in a $1 billion mansion and then your neighbor lives in a shanty house in a favela house selling crack in his backyard. Like something's got to give. So, anyways, do me a favor, please like, share, subscribe, check out Happy Army. As always, I'll link his channel and Discord link in description, merch link, buy a hat, buy a t-shirt, something like that. I love you guys. We'll see you in the next video.